Now I'd like to introduce Bob Reed, who's going to chair this session. So thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Matt. My name is Bob Reed. I'm a professor of economics and director of UC Meta at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. Our first speaker is Lee Jones. Lee is a senior biostatistician at QIMR, Berghofer Medical Research Institute, and she's past president of the Statistical Society of Australia Queensland branch, and she's currently completing a PhD in meta research. We have 7 minutes for these talks, so if I were prepared, I would have had a nice 1 minute remaining, but at that point, I don't have that. I'll just wildly gesticulate in the first row, and that'll be your signal.
Let's get the slides up. Okay, so today I'm going to start with an acknowledgement to the traditional owners. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also, before I start today, I would like to just thank AIMOS for allowing me to be here today with the support of a scholarship. I'd also like to thank my supervisors, Adrian and Demetrius, who have gone along with me with this journey of a PhD. So my PhD is in statistical quality in health and biomedical research. We have done this by choosing 100 random papers in +1 in health research in 2019 with a search criteria of linear regression. We have recruited 40 statisticians who rated 5 papers each. This ensured that each of the 100 papers was rated twice. Now, we did this so that we could understand what was being reported and how it was being interpreted. So with an emphasis on regression coefficients and understanding the size, the direction, and if people were interpreting scientific importance. What we found was about 80% of researchers report coefficients, less than half report confidence intervals, and about 20% report standard error. Now, a really important aspect of this study was actually to understand the variability of the ratings. This is because we wanted to understand real-world challenges of reviewing research articles. Now, the commonly reported statistics had quite high reliability, which was not surprising because they're more presence-absence things. We found that things that required interpretations had less reliability. And an interesting finding of this study was we found that statisticians could not agree on how many regressions were in a paper. So there were probably multiple reasons for this. One of the reasons being that I asked them to count how many univariate regressions there were and how many multivariable regressions there are. This was quite challenging in itself. But also sometimes the statisticians did not follow the instructions. So real world environments are very different to actual scientific experiments. Now, the other reason the regressions was difficult to count the regressions was that the method sections were often difficult to follow and incomplete. So my general conclusions are that there was overall poor reporting quality within the sample. Authors tended to rely on p-values for interpretation rather than actually interpreting any of the coefficients, and definitely not for scientific importance. Now, if statisticians had difficulty reviewing papers, this leads to questions: how on earth are general reviewers without statistical training doing to review papers? So what can we do about this? One thing I observed throughout the literature that rating the papers was that researchers tend to be very obsessed with, here's a t-test, here's an ANOVA, here's a regression, and actually they don't interpret anything. We really should be understanding more general overarching theoretical statistics, in that everything is a regression, and we should be talking about, here is a regression coefficient. Sometimes it means the difference between the means, sometimes it's a slope. How can we get researchers to better understand this? So we should be teaching in a general linear model framework. Therefore, we should be educating researchers, but we should also be educating reviewers. And I think something that hasn't been done too well is we need to support reviewers much better than we do. So one way is to give a simple survey that I provided to the statisticians, that it allows click a few questions, and then you can feed back that to the actual researcher. So you didn't check assumptions, and it can give you a quick report in an easy format. Another thing is providing resources such as article examples. What should a good article look like? Journals should be having these to give to both researchers. This provides both a guide to researchers, but also reviewers. Should I be rejecting people if this is not the case? I also strongly encourage reproducibility. Thank you for your time today.
My understanding we'll hold questions till the end, is that right? Okay. Our next speaker is Bermond Scoggins. He's a PhD candidate in political science at the School of Politics and International Relations at ANU. And his PhD research is entitled Illiberal Executives and Voter Responses. And Bermond is with us in spirit online.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be presenting at AIMOS virtually. I'm Bermond Scoggins, and I'll be talking about transparency in the social sciences with a focus on open data and pre-registration in political science and international relations. This paper was motivated by two questions that myself and Matthew Robertson had, which is how many published papers which analyze data and use StatInf have open data and code? How many experiments are pre-registered? And in answering these questions, we found that in the 2010 to 2021 period, only 21%, we estimate that only 21% of statistical inference papers have open data and code, and only 5% of experiments have an identifiable pre-registration report attached to it. To come to these estimates, we had to analyze and download 100,000 political science articles in the top 160 journals, as ranked by the Journal Citation Report, using text analysis and machine learning classifiers. We got into a bit of trouble with our library downloading all these papers, but that's it's all right now. So in political science and IR, there aren't that many papers that examine the prevalence of open science practices. So there are small samples covering only a handful of journals over short periods of time. So Grossman and Pettigrew, you know, they argue that political science and IR is approaching a replicability utopia, but they only assess 6 top journals in the fall of 2019. So there's no large-scale systematic evaluation of open data or pre-registration. And there is also no assessment of journal trends. This is of interest to us because in 2015, the American Political Science Association endorsed the Data Access and Research Transparency, the DART program, which focused on data and code sharing. So 27 journals, journal editors committed to implementing open data by 2016 in their journals, and 16 of those journals are in our data set. So we were obviously interested in answering whether these journals had actually followed through. And by and large, they did. And you know, we conclude in our paper that this kind of top-down approach to open science is very good and has led to considerable progress in increasing open data itself. So to get to our estimates, we had to first gather and classify papers. So we identified about 100,000 papers. We developed a dictionary of stat-inf and experimental terms. We had to hand code about 1,600 papers for training data, and we used 2 machine learning models. The first one is the basis for the results that I'll be reporting. And in total, out of these 100,000, we identified about 25,000 stat-inf papers and 5,000 experimental papers. So we then identified and matched those articles to open data and pre-registration repositories. So we queried the Harvard Dataverse, where a lot of journals park their data. We matched papers through a custom fuzzy string matching algorithm. We extracted internal data links and searched for data and pre-registration terms. We then had to validate those pre-registrations by searching the Experiments in Governance and Politics Registry, EGAP, OSF, as predicted, and various other repositories, such as those in Econ, which some of these papers used. So this is the main graph. So we can see that political science has increased open data rates during this period to about 30% in 2020 and 2021. We don't have complete data yet for 2021. But IR has maintained a consistent rate at about 20%. And as you can see with the gray bars, the number of statistical inference papers has been steadily climbing over this period. So there's a shift, an increased focus on statistical inference in the discipline. Here are the rates, open data rates by journal over this period. So we can see there's quite a stark difference between journals that have open data and those that don't. And as you can see, there are many articles in many journals that have little to no open data available. The results become even more obvious when we look at 2020 data alone. And the massive difference here can be attributed to the DART statement. So many of these journals, which have very high rates of open data, are DART signatories. We can look at those 16 journals directly, and we can see that a lot of progress has been achieved over this period. And we can only find 2 journals that have no identifiable data. And we'll talk about a bit more about those in the limitations section. So here we have pre-registration over the period. We can see that it's quite low, but it's slowly increasing. And as of 2021, it's about 10–15%. Here's pre-registration by journal for the entire period. And as you can see, the rates are low. Things improve a bit in 2020. So you can see the major journal, flagship journal in political science, the American Political Science Review, has about 40%. Political Science Research and Methods, a methods-focused journal, has about 30%. So obviously the limitations have to do with false positives and false negatives. For the machine learning classifier, we focus on Dataverse and online repositories. So obviously there are data sets and code nested in journal website appendices that are very hard to get to systematically. There are personal websites which data is housed in, as well as GitHub. The latter two, obviously, we would consider precarious data, so the availability of it is at the discretion of the researcher. It isn't like OSF, where it'll be there for a very long time. Websites can crash and so forth. So we're also not capturing data that is unavailable due to ethical and privacy concerns. There isn't too much of that, we think, in political science and IR, but we don't get at that. And we're also not examining whether the pre-registration reports are good, whatever that means to you. We are now in the process of sort of wrapping this up. Matt Robertson, he's finalizing the code to make our analysis clean and reproducible, and he's also creating a package to help analyze other fields efficiently. So we hope to partner with or assist other interested researchers to expand this kind of transparency work beyond political science and IR. So please have a look at our preprint on MetaArchive and get in touch with us with any queries or criticisms at our emails or on Twitter. We thank you very much for listening. I hope everybody has a terrific conference. Bye.
Because AIMOS is a really friendly place, we allowed him to go over his 7 minutes there. Okay, our next speaker is Richard McGee. Richard is a practicing pediatric endocrinologist and a clinical academic working with University of Newcastle. And his presentation is entitled Retractions in Pediatric Endocrinology. Are we failing to regulate the literature?
Napoleon Bonaparte had a saying, in politics, never retreat, never retract, never admit a mistake. And sometimes it feels like that in academia, people have the same policy. My name is Richard McGee. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I'm a clinical academic working with the University of Newcastle, and I'm based in Gosford, New South Wales. And I'm going to speak about our study looking at retractions in pediatric endocrinology. So how is quality assured in manuscripts or articles submitted for publication? First, they go through a round of internal editing and review. Following that, they are submitted to journals and undergo editorial and perhaps peer review. And if they're successful in being published, there's a period of post-publication review. So we can't really control process 1, the internal editing and review. We know process 2, editorial and peer review, is often quite flawed. And so we were interested in looking at this third part, the post-publication review, and what happens when a publication is in the literature and when an issue is found. We located the top 40 journals in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism according to the Samago Journal and Country Rank Index. We then searched PubMed for all publications from those journals without any date restrictions. We then limited those publications to retracted publications and applied a pediatric or child age filter. Once we had those list of retracted publications, we performed content analysis, looking at when, why, and who had published those retractions. There were over 35,000 publications from these journals, but only 6 retractions. This gives a retraction rate of 1.7 retractions per 10,000 publications, which is in fact far less than the average in the general medical literature, around 4 per 10,000 publications. The retractions were published between 2002 and 2015, and in fact have been cited so far a total of 256 times, indicating that these retracted publications are still being referenced in the medical literature. They came from authors located in US, Brazil, Israel, Switzerland, and Turkey, so quite diverse. Why were these retractions published, or why were the publications retracted? Because of unreliable data and results in 3 instances, duplication of data, misconduct by the author, methodological error, and self-plagiarism. This is likely only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to problematic publications, and it begs the question, are we failing to regulate the pediatric endocrine literature? Thank you.
Are they online to be able to ask?
Yes, they are.
questions? Okay. So we have time.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
We have time for some questions. And I presume if you have a question for one of our online speakers, then you should say it loudly, and I'll try to repeat it if it's maybe not so loud. So any questions, please?
Question for Brian on retractions. So 1.7 out of 10,000 seems like, but is there any idea of what it should be? Are there published articles in the literature that should obviously be retracted?
Bermond, did you hear that?
I'm sorry, was that question for me? I didn't quite catch it.
Yes, the question is that you said the retraction rate was 1.7 per 10,000, and the
That wasn't my paper.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the question. Yes, so 1.7 per 10,000 publications in pediatric endocrinology. And in fact, it's been well studied in other disciplines where the average is around 4 or sometimes higher. So there's a real difference there. And in terms of absolute numbers, you can see it's only 6 without any time restriction. So that's quite incredible that within a particular specialist field in medicine, there's only been so few articles retracted over that time. And that really makes me question whether we've missed other problematic publications.
I guess to clarify my question, are there clear cases in the published literature where things ought to be retracted, but they're not?
So I couldn't hear the full question. Can it be repeated?
The question is, are there examples where it's clear the paper should have been retracted, but it was not?
I've seen those in other fields, not particularly within pediatric endocrinology.
Thank you.
This would be a great time to wrap up. Time for one more question? Okay, Daniel?
To Richard again, with the number of citations, those retracted articles, did you look at the context surrounding those citations? Were they citing them specifically as retracted, or were they citing them as legitimate research?
The majority are citing those as legitimate research. I can't give you the percentage, but the vast majority citing it as legitimate research. And it's a real issue, isn't it? When people are not aware that articles have been retracted. Some services, like if you use Zetero, you can have it flag when an article has been retracted. That's quite helpful. But in other instances, unless you're specifically on the publisher's website or sometimes PubMed, you might not see that it's been retracted. So, yeah.
A quick follow-up to that. If Ivan Ransky's not here, but if he was here, he'd probably tell you to use the Retraction Watch database as well, because he's come up with not using that before in the past.
Yeah, and Retraction Watch is a great resource. If people are not aware of it, it's an excellent website to read and follow, and it's partly inspired this study.
All right, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Let's give a hand to our speakers.